Save Speaker Series. We are launching a poll right now, and we'd like for you to be able to complete that quickly. All the responses to the poll, they are anonymous, so don't worry about your individual response. We'll just talk about them in summary. My name is Orlando Gonzalez. My pronouns are he, him, and his. SAVE's mission is to promote, protect, and defend equality for people in South Florida who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. I'm really proud to serve as the executive director of the organization. Today is our second in a three-part series highlighting the candidates that are running for Miami-Dade County Mayor. All of the candidates that are running for mayor were invited, and 3 of them accepted the invitation, so that alone speaks volumes about the candidates that we have with us. Miami-Dade County includes a population of nearly 3 million residents, half of which are registered to vote. So we're excited to put these together. These sessions are intended really to help support you in being able to make an informed decision when you go to the ballot box in August and in November. In addition to these forums, the Save Action Pack will be inviting all the candidates to participate in our endorsement process. The candidates that wish to receive an endorsement will respond to a questionnaire that we send them. On that questionnaire, they're then able to share their policy position on various issues that affect the LGBT community. Following the completion of the questionnaire, each candidate is interviewed by a panel comprised of members of the community. And those members will then vote to either endorse a candidate or not. The work of SAVE is primarily supported by individual donors, followed by corporate sponsors and philanthropic grants. You can become a donor at www.save.lgbt/membership. Memberships start as low as $35 a year, so please join us. If you've not responded to the poll, please do so now. Today's forum will include a 15-minute presentation by Commissioner Cava. Following that presentation, we'll take questions from the public. You can start to submit those questions during the conversation, and I will be looking at them. And when we get to the part of the Q&A session, I will announce your questions and be able to feed those over to Commissioner Cava. All of the attendees in this webinar are muted except for us, the presenters. If you've joined us on Facebook Live, you can only listen in on the conversation. To submit questions, please go on to the Zoom. Let's get everybody to respond to that poll, and then let's go ahead and close that up now. What we have. Okay, so one of the questions that we have here is we're asking people if they're registered to vote. 100% of the respondents that are on here are all registered to vote, which is great news. The next question is if you're registered to vote by mail. Given the current public health crisis, we know that we may be having to look at the alternative of having our population, our residents here in Miami-Dade and throughout the country, actually, really even globally, do things much more with social distance. So voting by mail will be important for us here. We see that some people have not registered to vote by mail, so we know at SAVE that we're going to have to be making a deliberate effort in those steps. I know that the County Commission took some action on this item earlier this week, which is really wonderful. The next question is, have you decided who you're going to be voting for in the Miami-Dade County mayoral race? And we have 82% of people here have said yes, and another 20% have said no. So great to be engaged with people that are still looking to listen to the candidates and hear what they have to say. The next question is regarding our 2020 census. And I asked this question really because when we talk about voting, we're talking about your public duty as a whole, and answering the census is one part of that. And we see that we still have a bit of work to be doing here. We know that right now we are under responding to the census and some of the numbers that we've seen so far. So any way that we can continue to grow in this area, the better. So that's it for the poll. Thank you. It gives us an understanding of what's here. So it's time for us to get started. I want to welcome Commissioner Cava. Thank you for being with us tonight. I hope that you and your family are all well. I'm going to hand the floor over to you for 15 minutes, and what I'll do is that I'm going to go off camera, and then when there are 3 minutes left, I'll pop back up. That way you just have a signal that we should start to wind down, and then we'll jump into questions. So, Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so very much, Orlando. Thank you, SAVE, for inviting me to be with you this evening. You are a wonderful organization, always at the forefront. I was around when SAVE first began, and very excited to have been a supporter throughout my time in office. I think I was thinking every event that you've held, I have supported since I've been in office. But even before I was in office, I was a big SAVE fan. You know, I was very active in some of the early campaigns around marriage equality, adoption rights, and the like. Since I've been in office, excuse me, before I say since I've been in office, I would not be in office but for SAVE. And I want to be very, very clear about that. Not just because SAVE endorsed me in my first race in 2014 for the county commission and again for re-election in 2018, but because I was elected to fix the human rights ordinance. So let me be very specific about that. My predecessor blocked the expansion of the human rights ordinance to include transgender, and that was obviously unacceptable. And she was actually slated towards becoming the chair. She was the vice chair, and she was on her way up. And the community, progressive community, very worried about her leadership. And I was really recruited to fix this problem. And it was never in my game plan to be an elected official. I was very active as a nonprofit leader. I had, most recently, I had founded Catalyst Miami, originally as the Human Services Coalition. Before that, I ran the foster care system in Miami-Dade. I ran the Guardian Ad Litem program. I started Voices for Children, the fundraising arm, and as well I started many other organizations that had to do with progressive causes. But truthfully, there was somebody needed to run for this seat, County Commission District 8, and specifically to fix the regrettable position that the board had taken to not further the human rights ordinance. So, you know, I quickly consulted, I was approached, I quickly consulted my husband, my children, they were all in. My daughter, who was married to her wife, Rachel, in Massachusetts, because marriage was not legal at the time for two women in Florida. That was back in 2010. So, you know, she had said, Mom, fix it. So, you know, I'm a fixer. I like to solve problems. And I, of course, am always about people being at the table and having their rights and vindicating and advocating and vindicating their rights. So when I said, yes, I would step up to run for office, it was very much with this in mind, to fix that human rights ordinance. And with the incredible support of an army of volunteers and the endorsement of SAVE, we rode to victory. It was quite unexpected, apparently, because incumbents don't lose in Miami-Dade politics. That was before term limits, so now we are going to see a big turnover, but at the time, really it was very, very unusual, and I, of course, was a new candidate. I had never run for office. So there were a few other groups. It was a great coalition. I was able to consolidate support from labor, from environmental groups, from women's rights groups as well, and others, and we ran a great campaign, and we won very close, but it was a good 2% spread, and I won by 600 and something votes in that August 2014 election. So, of course, right away, we did fix that, and I was really proud to be co-prime sponsor of the expanded human rights ordinance with now Chairwoman Audrey Edmondson as the lead prime sponsor. So I could go on and talk about my history of service. I don't know whether I should do that or pause for questions. So how is this going to work?
Let's continue, and then we'll do the questions at the end of your 15 minutes, unless okay. that's all you got. But otherwise, when we get there, go for it. Keep going.
I'm not at a loss for words. Let me continue. You know, actually, I want to go back a little bit and say, before I was in elected office, I am an attorney and I'm a social worker. And my first job in Miami, which goes back 40 years, was, excuse me, hello, come back. My first job in Miami was at Legal Services of Greater Miami, and I was working on an education advocacy project. There were 3 little girls, triplets, who had been HIV exposed. Both of their parents, as it turned out, were diagnosed with AIDS, and this was at the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic. They were told they could not go to school, And I worked with the ACLU at the time. We filed a class action lawsuit, and we were successful in getting them the right to a public education, and guidelines were developed for the school system to allow those children to go to school, and whatever precautions to train all of the personnel in the school system to safely handle bodily fluids and that sort of a thing, the protocol that is in place to this day for any kind of course, now we're in a pandemic, so you know, we're upping the ante on what to do with contagion. At the same time as I was vindicating the rights of these 3 little girls, my husband was one of the very first physicians in Miami-Dade County to treat people with AIDS. And I was working with the Jackson pediatric leadership in AIDS cases. He was working on the front line with, unfortunately, adults primarily who had contracted the disease. So we were unified in our fight for justice and equality and good treatment for people affected by that epidemic. And he continues to be at the forefront on the medical side, and I am very proud in office that I have been part of or initiated a good number of policy changes that address the issues of the LGBTQ community. And for example, let's talk about conversion therapy, which, you know, has reared its ugly head a few times. And Commissioner Hayman brought the first legislation, which unfortunately did not pass, and it only affected the unincorporated parts of Miami-Dade County. And I told the SAVE leadership at the time that I would sponsor a countywide ban, not just to focus on the unincorporated, that I would preempt any cities to make sure that there was no conversion therapy in Miami-Dade County. And I'm still stand ready to work on that. It was said at the time that an organizing effort needed to happen first, but I'm ready, willing, and able to take that on. And of course, as mayor, all the more so. Also, I brought legislation condemning Mississippi and North Carolina when they discriminated against the LGBTQ community. And I directed through legislation, the Beacon Council, our economic development arm, and our Visitors Bureau to recruit the companies that had boycotted those states and encourage them to come to Florida, to relocate to Florida. I also worked directly with SAVE and on LGBTQ issues in Tallahassee, and particularly with then Representative David Richardson, Michael Greco, Jose Javier Rodriguez, to ban conversion therapy in Florida. So I worked very hard on that effort. And then we also worked on a resolution to urge the passage of the Competitive Workforce Act in Florida to ban discrimination. And then later I worked with Commissioner Eileen Higgins, to get the county to support the Florida Inclusive Workforce Act to ban discrimination on sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. We also condemned the Trump administration for their policy of denying birthright citizenship to children born through surrogacy abroad. So that was my legislation, which did pass at the commission, that being a problem for adoption surrogacies, particularly affecting LGBTQ community. And we most recently passed a resolution condemning Cuba's cancellation of the Conga Against Homophobia demonstrations. That was thereby denying human rights to the Cuban LGBTQ community. So both of those were successful at the commission. Also, I expanded the staff of the Human Rights Commission. I learned through my appointee to the Human Rights Commission that there's a big backlog of cases, like 6 months, an inadequate number of staff to handle the complaints that come forward, which include a range of human rights, including LGBTQ, and I was successful in adding additional staff to that office to assist them. Most recently, I've been delighted to have joined with Commissioner Higgins in creating the new LGBTQ Advisory Board, and my appointee, Jerry Chasen. I'm sure many of you know Jerry. I don't know if Jerry's on the line here, but I was delighted to appoint Jerry, who I've known for many, many years, and his wonderful work in the community. So I think it's fair to say that I am standing with you in solidarity on all of your issues. I'm very eager to continue to be at the forefront of any fights that will protect your rights and all rights of our citizenry. And I'm very proud of the associations that I've had, including my endorsements in 2014 and 2018. I consulted with my daughter right before this call to see if there was anything in particular that she thought I should bring to bear. And, you know, she just said, Mom, you know, be yourself. So, but I'm very, very proud that my daughter, her wife, and my 2 grandchildren, one of whom was born in Florida, adopted here, yay, because 2010, that became legal here in Florida. And when she was married in 2015, they had to be married in Massachusetts because it was not yet legal. Oh no, excuse me. When they were married in 2010, they were not able to be married here because it was not legalized in Florida until 2015. So again, I'm thrilled to be with you, and I'm ready to have a conversation.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And I'm going to stop my timer here. I really appreciate the overview that you presented, and also you know, the historical part, because I think that there's been incredible progress that has been made. One of the things that we have found, particularly in the SAVE endorsement process, is that we are getting more and more candidates that are pro-equality candidates, right? So our panels sit down, they look at candidates, and all across the board, they say, you know, they're all really good on our issues. And one of the wonderful things that we're able to do now in our endorsement process is that the panel starts to say, well, let's look at other issues that go beyond the LGBT issues and look at quality of life issues. So for you, it's going to be a 2-part question. So one is, why are you running to be the mayor? And what are the top 3 issues for the county with regard to quality of life?
Excellent. Well, I think hopefully you could tell from what I've already told you that I am running to make a difference. I'm running based on my mission and the causes that are so critical to the future of our community. In other words, you know, I'm 64. I've retired my other career as a lawyer and a social worker running nonprofit organizations. I could be spending more time with my grandchildren who are now in Washington, D.C., but I care passionately about this place. And I know that we are paradise, but oftentimes we're paradise in peril. You know, I led through Hurricane Andrew. I was part of the recovery efforts. I launched Catalyst Miami after that time. And I am just passionate about this place. That having been said, you know, we are the most dynamic, the most culturally diverse, the most beautiful, have the best recreational opportunities, the best food, the best music, dancing, you name it. But unfortunately, we are also a crossroads for a lot of challenges. And let me start with affordability. You know, we have one of the highest costs of living now, and still one of the lowest salary levels. So people are not able to pay to sustain a basic lifestyle here in Miami-Dade, so many. So we, again, have one of the largest gaps, and unfortunately a growing gap. We benefit from foreign investment. We appreciate all the visitors. They're our lifeline. You know, tourism is the #1 economy. Foreign investment in real estate is great, but it does drive up prices. And while we have what turn out to be essential workers, so many of our workforce essential, we do not pay them what they deserve, and certainly don't provide them benefits like earned paid leave, which was just defeated at the county commission today. And I'm very, very distressed about that vote. We could talk more about that. But in any event, that disconnect between the cost of living and the salaries is really making it difficult for people to stay here. We have one of the highest college graduation rates in the country, and people that would like to stay here if they've come from outside, but they can't find jobs that will support their living here. We also have what I'll call black flight. Many in our African American community cannot find jobs, and they have to leave maybe to Broward or elsewhere to be able to sustain their lives. And so this is really bad. And now with this pandemic, and we've seen probably 20% unemployment as a result in the short term, and maybe worse, it's going to accentuate it. So we have to really, really be on our guard to deal with these inequalities. So it hurts our businesses, it hurts our quality of life, it hurts all of us. A second major issue that I will talk about is our environment. Again, we're here for the beauty, for the resources, the sea, the bay, you know, the fishing. And we have, unfortunately, sea level rise, unprecedented. The Gulf Stream has slowed down. We have more sea level rising here. The salt is intruding into our fresh water supply, compromising our wells, our aquifer. We need to promote Everglades restoration to bring fresh water down. 1/3 of all Floridians rely on that aquifer for drinking water. So Everglades restoration is really an important part of the agenda. We also have to make sure our water is not polluted. So we need to make sure that at Florida Power and Light, that the leakage of the salty plume under the canal system does not interfere with our freshwater supply. We also have to make sure that our sewage system is up to par. We're not having leaks and our beaches are not contaminated with nutrients. So we have a lot of challenges about our environment. And I am the water warrior. I have been fighting on all those fronts. I've learned much more than I thought I would ever, probably PhD level, on environmental causes. I've always been a lover of nature. That's where my family has spent all of our free time. But truly, I have become the environmentalist on the county commission. And as mayor, this will be top of my agenda, and I'll bring our environmental staff close by so that it's not buried within the administration. And I will talk about traffic. You know, traffic, we're not experiencing it so much now, but I guess in some ways we wish it would come back because it would be a sign of a recovered economy. However, we must have world-class transit. We don't have, our transit system is laughable. People who depend upon it cannot. Employers might not hire people who are dependent upon public transit. We must change that. We must make the investments. And then people who have a choice, who have cars, will be able to give up their cars and use our world-class transit system. So I've been fighting mightily for that and other mobility options like safety while we ride our bicycles and pedestrians and the like. So I have many other things on my agenda, but I'll just stop with those three since you asked.
Awesome, thank you. You touched on affordability, the environment, and traffic. Very helpful. And I think, you know, some of the questions that we're getting are within those policy frames, but they're sort of personalized to the way people are reacting to them at a very personal level, right? We have a question here that says, you know, I'm worried about climate change. The city of Miami recently raised the street 2 blocks from my house. Should I sell my home and move because of flooding, or do you have a plan?
So the city of Miami benefited from Hurricane Irma. I think just when the vote was coming, whether to re-up the bond and put money into the infrastructure, the streets around Brickell were flooded. So people really got religion real quick and they understood the importance of it. And so the city of Miami is moving forward with an aggressive plan. It includes pumps, drainage, stormwater improvements, some walls, all of that. And I believe that Miami-Dade County lags. I believe that we need to also, for the county, look at those major infrastructure projects. First of all, that will be like a green economy program. These are jobs that hopefully there'll be some federal money. There's a bill now making its way, the new WRDA bill they call it, which is a water infrastructure bill. Those are dollars that will create jobs while building up the infrastructure that we need. So it's not just people's homes, it's all of our infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the sidewalks, the stormwater system. These all really need to be upgraded so that we can handle. You know, Miami Beach has a lot of pumps, and originally they didn't have filtration adequate. Now they've added some filtration because we were seeing, unfortunately, excess nutrients going out into the bay. So that is part of it. We have to have a comprehensive system. One of the things I've discovered is that our water and sewer department does not coordinate with our environmental department. So I'm a collaborator by nature. That's my middle name, collaboration. I've actually brought DERM and water and sewer to the table to plan together. And I have to keep doing that because the current administration does not prioritize these things. So I will be very, very actively engaged in protecting our infrastructure, improving our infrastructure, creating jobs that will be good while we're building our infrastructure, and making sure that we can preserve the best of our assets. Look, some things as the seas rise, we're going to have to recognize what things are not worth really investing, but we still have lots of time to have a thriving economy.
Great, thank you. You're reminding me of those FDR periods in time in the American history where we looked at rebuilding the infrastructure as a way to not only strengthen the country, but to also create jobs. And so I always love making sort of a blend of that, come together. Let's go to the next question. So again, along the themes that you presented early on in the three areas, let's talk about affordability. So what specifically will you do in terms of affordable housing? Some cities have a form of rent control, some give a subsidy, and what would be the best thing for Miami-Dade County, given not only the crisis in housing and affordability in general, but also I think that the coronavirus public health crisis has brought some of those disparities in health and in income and in housing, really sort of like highlighting them at a really large amount.
Yes, for sure. We've exposed the nasty secret of our society, which is the great inequality. Even as you say with the coronavirus, how African Americans are twice as likely to be infected. I mean, it's just astonishing. And that comes from historic disinvestment and historic bias in so many areas. We know environmental pollution happens more in communities of color, et cetera. There's just so many ways that we have put these communities at a disadvantage. And we are seeing it now when this coronavirus is so venal and merciless as it cuts people down. So yeah, we have a lot of things that we can do to address the housing crisis. We have a lot of county property and other public agencies that is coming out in dribs and drabs and is given out as favors to certain developers or organizations rather than looking at it as a commodity that we must aggressively pursue. There's a sense of urgency about this that is not being projected. It's sort of business as usual. We should be looking at 10,000 units a year to start to catch up with the need. I mean, it's very dire. We're also losing affordable units that were subsidized and the subsidy period's running out and now they can go to market rate. So we're having to work to protect that housing and keep it sustained at an affordable level. So we have to use some of our surtax dollars and our state Sadowski Act funds to keep units affordable as well as build. There's also techniques to build more aggressively, more affordably. There's form building. There's a developer that's doing a lot in my district that you don't require the same level of skilled workers, so it can be built less expensively, and all of the electrical and plumbing is sort of built into the form. So there's ways of building it less expensive and quicker. Also permitting costs money, delays cost money. So we do not have a really streamlined process. We're supposed to prioritize affordable housing, but it doesn't move quickly enough. So I would take the available property, I would put it into production quicker, I would cut the red tape, I would reduce the construction costs, and I would use our subsidy dollars more aggressively. Right now, we're in a rental market. Of course, homeownership is great, but we have a huge lag, huge demand for rental. We need to do that. Also, because of the changes from coronavirus market, let's see what happens in the market. We know there'll be less of a demand for commercial because more people will work from home. Even the county government, 30% of the workforce could work from home. And this mayor is advising all the departments to keep it going. We don't need people to go into the office. So hopefully there'll be some shakeup there. And then we need to get all the all the state dollars, the Sadowski Act funds that have been stolen every year by the state legislature for other purposes. That money needs to come here for our purposes. There is also some federal money that can be deployed, and we're aggressively pursuing that as well for additional Section 8 subsidized vouchers. And I'm going to be working now on a plan to get that out to the community.
Great. So, early on when we started to have the shelter in place, you were very vocal about the state's preparedness and response to the unemployment situation that we had at the state level. But in general, we would love to hear your thoughts about the state and county response to the coronavirus, to COVID-19, Would love to hear your overview on that. You were great in all moments when we first had the shelter in place. Your storytelling and book reading, I think, was really awesome, and I really applaud that. But I'd love to hear your take on the public policy aspect of all of this.
Yes, thank you for the shout out about my storytelling. That was actually my favorite part. And now I've stopped doing it because business has taken over as usual. But I did do a month of every morning stories for children, and my grandchildren listened in. So, I've been very impatient with the slow response. Let's start with the federal government. Now it's becoming clear that this virus was running around our country November, December, while we were in denial. Not me, but people were in denial, even when the president was being briefed about these things. And we know how tragic that was. And then the World Health Organization offered us tests, but we turned them down. We could do better through CDC. Then CDC botched it. And the testing was set back 3 weeks, even from the date that they finally took it up. Now, we're back and forth. Do we have a national task force or not? It's just been totally chaotic with no real leadership at the national level. So different governors have handled it differently. And our governor does benefit from a good relationship with the president, which means that he's been able to commandeer some equipment and supplies, which has been good for our state. The PPE, the personal protective equipment, which is so highly prized now and in short supply. Also testing. And we are gearing up more testing in Florida, but we're still not at the level we need to be. Let's say roughly a third of where we need to be with testing. So we need to have massive testing. We also need to be medically informed about how we can responsibly reopen. That means monitoring the hospital's entrances, the ICU usages, the ventilator usage. And we have been monitoring those. And for now, we are at a reasonable safety level. But if we open up, which the Mayor Jimenez is talking about doing, without the adequate testing in place and without the contact tracing that we need to do in place, then we really are at risk of another spike, another surge. We all know that the important thing to flatten the curve is to not overwhelm our healthcare system. We've been able to save a lot of lives, and our healthcare heroes and sheroes are really to be commended. They're putting their own lives at risk every day, and they are working effectively to save lives. That having been said, if we overwhelm our healthcare system, we will be in trouble. So the contact tracing we're not doing, again, that's supposed to be about 30 people to 100,000 population. And these are aggressive sleuths, people that go out and interview you, everybody you've been in contact with, and then pursue them. And then we need isolation. We do not have an isolation system. People are going home and infecting others or continuing to circulate without protecting others. So, I've been kind of nipping at the heels of our mayor and to some extent our governor since the beginning of March. Let's be safer at home. Finally, that was ordered. Let's have a masking regimen. Finally, that was established. Let's have virtual meetings. That was done after I called for it. In fact, I was the only county commissioner to say I would not show up to an in-person board meeting because of the risks. And fortunately, by the time the meeting came, it was decided to go virtual, but I was not going to go. I called aggressively for the county to be a partner in helping people get relief. These unemployment applications that have been such a nightmare. What a criminal situation. People still 2 months in waiting, not only for a check, but even waiting to know that their application has been accepted. So finally, the county started distributing paper applications, collecting them at the library, submitting them, express mail, as well with my urging, adding food stamps, Medicaid, cash assistance, other programs. So these are things that I've been pushing on. And unfortunately, we did not meet for over a month, and I had to do all of this from the sidelines virtually. Finally, now the board has started to meet again, and we'll have some more involvement. But the mayor's had 100 people meeting in task forces without the commission's involvement. He has not made it public who those 100 people were. He's not made it public what are the drafts that he's circulating for safely reopening. He's not made it public the contract with McKinsey that's helping to design these protocols. So we're kind of on the sidelines here, and that is extremely frustrating. So I've been calling for responsibly reopening and recovering. We need to have the testing, the tracing. We need to have a chief medical officer. We have daily briefings with the mayor. We do not, up until recently, we didn't have any medical personnel on the line. And until my insistence and another commissioner's, we did not even have Jackson on the line. But it was Carlos Magoya, the CEO, who's not a physician. He's bringing information about Jackson, but he doesn't have the medical expertise. So we need to be medically driven, data driven, not politically driven. And I'm afraid that these decisions are now being made politically rather than based on good medical data.
Thanks for that. The next sort of set of questions, I'm going to consolidate them because they're all in the same space of transportation. And so one of the comments that's made here is that it's about accessibility, right? People need to drive from the remote areas of Miami-Dade County in before they can really ever access either the bus route or the rail system. So that's one sort of commentary that's made there. And the question is here, does the commissioner support, number one, the expansion of the Metro Rail system, and also the expansion of the Tri-Rail system, particularly looking at how it compares with the more expensive and very limited Bright Line service that's there. So it's really about our ability to move around the entire beautiful region that we have. I know that there's still some limitations in our ability to get to Miami Beach or to get to other parts. So it's your take on transportation and expansion.
Great, thank you for that question too. So I chair the South Florida Regional Planning Council. So that comprises Monroe, Miami-Dade, and Broward. I've served on that since I've been in office, and I'm proud to now be the chair. But I was involved in regional planning from before when I was running the Human Services Coalition and Catalyst Miami. I was always involved in this regional conversation because our economy, our transportation, our education systems, they're all really regional, and people are crossing county lines for all those purposes constantly. And unfortunately, our transportation system doesn't really function that way. And also, we all know that the half penny was a lie. So I'll just back up to explain what I mean by that. I, of course, was a citizen voting in favor of the half penny, the People's Transportation Plan. And it turns out, I did not know this until recently, that there was originally a plan to tax a full penny of sales tax. But it became clear that the full penny would not pass. It was reduced to a half penny, but the program was always at the full penny amount. In other words, when it was decided to go half, the program did not become half. So what we were promised, including extension of Metro Rail and these various corridors, was never possible with a half penny. And that was really not disclosed to the public. So come to find out, we have half as much money as we need for the full plan. And then there's a recession in the middle. And the Citizens Independent Transportation Trust that oversees that money, I was not in office, voted to allow the county commission to steal some of those funds for operation of the transit system. That had not been approved by the public, but that board allowed it. And that further diminished the funds that were available for the kinds of infrastructure that had been promised. That having been said, the line to the airport was completed. A lot of transportation, public works projects, a lot of roads that were approved as part of that referendum have come to pass. And as well, the cities have all received dollars, and they've done some really good things. They've created local transit systems that are working. The city of Miami, Doral, others have done a good job, Coral Gables. Now, it come to find out, when that money was given to the cities, there was no requirement of coordination. So I actually had to bring legislation to require that the apps that people use would speak to each other so that they could be true commuter services, right? If you take the Coral Gables trolley, you don't know when it's not coordinated with the county transportation system. So now it's been said in the future contracts that that will happen. So here we are with half the money. So about 3 years ago, I guess, could be a little bit more, the Transportation Planning Organization, TPO, which includes all the county commissioners plus the cities above 50,000, voted to endorse the 6-corridor SMART plan. And it is a SMART plan, and it did include, for example, South Dade Corridor, my corridor, which is along US 1, was called the Busway. We renamed it to the Transitway in anticipation of something really good. And of course, I voted after study that it would be an extension of Metro Rail. Unfortunately, the majority did not vote with me, and we got instead approval for Bus Rapid Transit. Now, Bus Rapid Transit is a good system. It will definitely build more ridership, but it will not build as much ridership as extension of the Metro Rail, which is a 1-seat ride. And I thought that the more expensive price tag was worth it for the better return. However, the mayor derailed that. That's kind of a good pun there. He derailed that plan even after promising it in his reelection. And so now the Bus Rapid Transit is coming. The North Corridor, the same. 27th Avenue was promised elevated. I voted for elevated. And now I hear there's some disturbance in the force, and we're going to be voting on it soon, and God willing, we'll be able to deliver that. So there have been a lot of false starts and a lot of broken promises along the way. It doesn't mean that we haven't used the money, but it's been really a problem for public trust. As far as Tri-Rail, there was an item that came to the board that I voted against. I was the only person to vote against building the Bright Line station in Aventura. The reason I voted against it, $73 million, I think it was, because it's not a true commuter service, just like you said, just like the person pointed out. Bright Line will not travel frequently. It will be expensive. It doesn't have that much capacity. The parking spaces in Aventura are limited. It will really do nothing to reduce traffic coming out of the Northeast Corridor. That same rail line should be open to Tri-Rail. Tri-Rail would be the true commuter service, but it requires Bright Line to approve it. And we did not even condition that money on the allowance of Tri-Rail coming through. It was really a bad deal for Miami-Dade County.
Great. So the next question is really focused on the current political environment that we're in. So we're looking at the last 4 years and what has been created, I think, as the new normal for the type of divisiveness that goes on, the type of, a lot of legislation can't move forward because it's sort of stuck in partisan politics. And we know that the race is a nonpartisan race, but nonetheless, all of this sort of always, shows up as a way to be able to divide one side of the aisle from the others. And so what's your vision of good government?
Well, my vision of good government is government that people can trust. And it's very corrosive for the biggest and best democracy in the world to have such a low voter participation rate, such a disregard and distrust of government. What causes that? I believe that it's the corrosive power of money and influence, that it's the lack of transparency and engagement. For example, I have fought for public participation every step of the way, and my colleagues do not join me in that. There was a vote this week to diminish the authority of our community councils, as one example. I think most of the commissioners think that they're a waste of time. I think they're government closer to the people that have a chance to weigh in on growth decisions, which after all are not so well handled by our county commission, looking at history. Also, thank goodness in this coronavirus virtual era, now people can participate in our board and committee meetings by telephone, by email, by live telephone call-in. I fought for that before, but it's at the prerogative of the chair, and our chairs have not deemed fit to create virtual platforms for participation. It's so much more convenient, and as a result, we've seen actually an uptick of people participating, and that's a good thing. We want to hear from the public. So there are many other ways that I've tried to promote transparency. I'm constantly communicating with the public. I do a debrief of every Board of County Commission meeting by video on my Facebook page. I hold numerous town halls on issues, on things that people care about. And most of my legislation, which is 500 plus pieces of legislation, have come from advice ideas that I've gotten from the public. So my idea of good government is government that is by the people and for the people. I truly believe that when the people lead, the leaders follow. And I can give numerous examples of when it has worked. I'll just give one. We did not get a chief resilience officer or an allocation for dealing with climate change and sea level rise until people showed up wearing life jackets to the annual budget hearing at the county. So, you know, a little bit of street theater can really help to bring the point home because people will remember a picture, maybe more than they'll remember words. But there was also an expansion of parks that came when people participated. There was also a rollback in cuts to transit when people participated. So, you know, just every year, people have made a difference, and I have fought repeatedly for the opportunity for people to really take part. And let me say a word about partisanship, since you mentioned that.
Yes.
I think it's a great strength that we're a nonpartisan body because local government is by and large about local issues, local needs. And I've been really proud of the support that I have across the aisle. So, you know, people know that I really care. I've even brought legislation to improve the elections process. So for example, now any donations to a political committee or PAC to local county races have to be disclosed. During my first election, my opponent participated in a PAC that she denied knowledge of that PAC, and that PAC put up a ridiculous ad campaign against me saying I was responsible for the Marlins Stadium. Okay, look at me. Do you think I was responsible for the bad Marlins Stadium deal? Not hardly, but through some convoluted set of circumstances, that chain was made and PAC money was used to try to discredit me. And that was very unpopular. It still is, but it's particularly unpopular because the Marlins bad deal had just become widely known. So I brought the legislation to make public those kinds of donations to PACs, as well as to disclose conflict on the record, because it used to be a commissioner could just walk off the stage and never disclose the conflict. And I think the public has a right to know if there's a conflict. So now that does happen as a result. Unfortunately, sometimes things do look partisan. Today, the earned leave legislation that I brought to cover contract employees with the county, so vital anytime, but now in the coronavirus pandemic, imagine we have 3,000 people that could have benefited from this legislation that do not have paid sick, paid leave, any paid holidays. They are going to work sick. And how tragic is that, especially in these times when we need people to stay home, right? It's safer at home. So unfortunately, I might have predicted it would have fallen along partisan lines, but really all the Democrats on the committee, except for one, voted against it too. So there you go.
Yes, yes. So it's interesting, right? I mean, even when it's a nonpartisan race, it shows up anyway, it rears its head. I guess that's just part of the reality of life. One of our attendees says, thank you for your historic vote to add gender identity and expression to the county human rights ordinance. Do you have plans to enforce the ordinance? And especially when it comes to transgender people in the community and also our guests that are people of color?
So first of all, I believe that you have to enforce the laws. That, you know, actually this is a story about my daughter, who's an environmental activist in Washington, D.C. area. And she worked really hard to get some policy passed. She was really excited about it. And then, of course, nobody was enforcing it. And she said, Mom, I don't get it. You get all these people involved. And now, you know, still you have to fight. I said, yes, still you have to fight. So that is why I fought for the additional staff person at the Human Rights Commission. That's why I have fought for additional support for the Living Wage Commission, for the wage theft. You know, it's only as good as the enforcement. And we can't just pass these things on the books and then, you know, put them on the shelf. And I am not satisfied at all that we are doing the job we need to do to deal with discrimination. Discrimination in the LGBTQ community and discrimination in housing, just discrimination across the board. In fact, there's a proposal that I support to pay a nonprofit and labor group to educate the public about their rights as workers, because people don't know. People are totally confused what their rights are. So I believe that we must be aggressive, we must educate, and we must vindicate. and I certainly will support an increased enforcement effort.
Great, thanks for that. For the next question, let's look at immigration. And I know that immigration policy really starts at the federal level, but there's always a trickle-down effect that impacts how we respond at the state level and at the local level. The question here is, it remarks that you voted against the current mayor's directive to comply with ICE, and particularly that designation to make us a sanctuary city. Tell us more about that and what you think about both immigrants in the community and the undocumented.
Thank you. Well, we are a community of immigrants. It's what makes us great. As a matter of fact, I'm sure the majority of people on this call come from people who immigrated, right? They were not native born here, Native Americans. So we are all united in having come to this country, or our forebears, for a better life, for a better future. And that is the great promise of this country. It's what really has built this country and made it great. And we know that each wave experiences hardships. When the Cubans come fleeing Castro, we know many of them with great educations had to start doing menial labor and work their way up. And now they have really done so much to shape the future of this community. When the Blacks came from the Caribbean, they came from the Bahamas, and they were the original builders of this community. They settled here and became part of the great legacy of African Americans here in this country, or Caribbean Americans. So each successive wave, the Nicaraguans, the Hondurans, the Venezuelans, the Colombians, and each one arguing over whose cafe is better and whose food is better. It's just a great, great melange of the wonderful things that make Miami so exciting, so dynamic. That having been said, because we are such an immigrant-friendly place, we have not had those really reactionary attitudes towards new waves of immigrants, and that, again, is part of the greatness of this place. So, when others have really rallied for walls and this and that, that has not been the predominant theme in our community. So when Commissioner Hayman, before I was elected, rallied to not enforce ICE detainers, that is to hold people in jails just so the immigration authorities could pick them up. And she did it for the reason of saving money, because it was costing us about $500,000 at the time, and there was a budget shortfall. I went and I spoke as a citizen, not as an elected official, in support of that legislation, and I was very proud of that fact. Then came the concern that we were on the so-called sanctuary list, and this actually started with the Obama administration. But when Trump was elected, it went into hyperspeed, and there was a big concern. There was a tweet about it, and the mayor turned tail, enforced the policy to try to stay clear of losing federal funds. That was their fear. I knew it would be unconstitutional to remove those funds. I knew it was unconstitutional to hold those people without due cause. And we had a debate about it after the mayor. This was retroactively, and 3 of us voted against that policy. And honestly, it was one of the low days on the commission from my experience. I was so frustrated at the lack of understanding and attention to this issue. Of course, time has proven me correct. Those were illegal policies. They didn't need to be implemented. And what I was able to do was make sure that our police would not act as ICE substitutes. And we do have clear policy on the books that I pressed for that make it clear that our police do not enforce immigration laws for ICE. The immigration authorities need to do that because it suppresses people's trust of the law enforcement. It suppresses their involvement in reporting crime when they're victims of crime and so on. And I'm happy at least that is in place.
Great, thank you. This is a related question, and it's interesting. In my former life here in Miami, I used to work with the Miami-Dade County Public Schools in school yearbooks. I was all over the county, and I saw that there are many different types of Miamis, right? It's not one big monolithic experience. And I love this question, which is, how do you plan to appeal to the working class Latinos in Hialeah and Little Havana? And it's just sort of highlighting a particular community in this question, but it highlights that there's pockets throughout our entire county that are very distinct from one another.
It's been a great joy to get to know the community even better through this campaign. I've always focused on the whole county, my previous work, but as county commissioner for the last almost 6 years, I've been really focused on South Dade more so, as well as some big policy issues. So it's just been so much fun to get out and discover and learn about. And there are distinct issues in every community. So from Sunny Isles Beach to Hialeah, Medley, Westchester, Aventura. It's just, it's a wonderful, wonderful. And by the way, not a stew or a soup, but a salad, which was an analogy that I heard, because all the ingredients maintain their distinct flavors as well as together taste even better. So, I've spent my entire life working in lower income communities. I've spent my entire life dealing with communities of color or immigrant communities. I've done immigration law. I have worked to help children to get what they deserve in the school system and not to be overly disciplined if they happen to be born with a darker skin color. I have fought for housing rights, for employment rights, for healthcare rights, for the rights of people with disabilities. I have worked in every single area that has to do with creating opportunity, equality, equity, to be at the table. And I think that, having spent my time in the community and I love to learn and listen, I hope and I think that people respond to that and they know that I'm sincere in wanting to learn. I'm always open. I'm 24/7. I'm responding to emails, texts, Messenger on Facebook, you name it, because I just so treasure and value the voices of our diverse community, and always with respect, even if we disagree. So that's how I expect to be, as I always am.
Yeah. So this is going to be the last question to sort of wind down. And it's a question in two parts. One of them is a retrospective and the other one's prospective. And so the retrospective one is, what is the one policy success that you've had in your tenure so far that you're most proud of? And the second is, what sets you apart from all the other candidates moving forward as you look at your vision?
Wow. Well, first of all, I forgot to say that yo me defiendo en español también. Y por eso puedo comunicar con todas las comunidades no Haitian Creole todavía, pero voy a practicar. Okay, so just to get that off the record out there.
Love it.
I have so many things I'm proud of, I have to say. So, what comes into mind? I mean, we did ban fracking, we banned styrofoam at the beaches. I ordered a study of solar capacity, which hasn't gone forward, but we will go solar as mayor. We could save tens of millions of dollars by going solar, and that was my legislation. It's teed up and ready to put it into action. We have an employee protection ordinance that I'm extremely proud of. It was one of the first things that I worked on because what it did is it provides more protection for people to feel confident that if there's fraud, waste, or abuse, that it can be addressed. And in conjunction with our Inspector General, all 20,000 plus employees have been trained on the new law, and there's been an uptick in reporting of fraud, waste, and abuse. So, I'm very adamant that a big part of balancing a budget is not wasting money. And, we need our employees, our responsible employees, to talk to us about ways we can do that. So I'm very proud. And then I will say, one of the pieces of legislation that has gotten the most traction is the Convention To End Discrimination Against Women. So we adopted the UN treaty. We're the first in the nation, county, to do so. And it has had a tremendous lift for women's issues in Miami-Dade County, and will continue to do so for many years to come. But I will say that what I haven't succeeded at, and that I will succeed as mayor, is to really look at these disparities. We will have an office of racial and ethnic disparities right in my office. We will be looking closely under the microscope at everything we do to make sure that we do not leave people behind. So why should people vote for me? I'm the real deal. I don't want to be somebody. I want to do something. I want to do something bigger and better than what I've done so far. I feel that I've been so very fortunate. I've been so very fortunate in my life to be able to achieve a great deal. I've had a wonderful education, a happy upbringing, a wonderful marriage, a beautiful family, and I love this community. I love to solve problems, and I will bring my full, how many decades? 6 decades plus of experience to the forefront, creating jobs, growing an economy that will work for everybody. The rising tide will definitely lift all boats in my administration, and I very much look forward to having the trust of the voters to get there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We've come to the end here, and I want to thank you so much for joining us in this webinar. I really appreciate you being with us, and I really want to also thank the audience members that have joined us today. We had a lot of activity both online on the Zoom and through Facebook. So, you know, this is a very critical year, everyone, but it's just not enough for us to just go out there and vote. We need to make sure that we have a plan for voting, and that means also including other people in our community to come with us and vote. We want to remind everybody to sign up to vote by mail. Go to save.lgbt/vote2020. We also encourage people to join our endorsement panels. This is how we get people involved in the community, to be able to interview candidates and be a part of the process. It's always a wonderful exchange with members of the community who bring up various amounts of issues and topics into the conversation. Be a volunteer, become a member of SAVE. The presentation that we have today is going to be sent to everybody. We're going to be able to share this with everyone as we proceed. Tomorrow, we're going to have former Mayor Alex Pinellas join us, and it will be the last of our presentation here. So, Commissioner, thanks again. Really loved having you. You have the last word.
Oh, thank you. You know, I wanted to tell you how proud I am that in 2019, I received the Voice of Equality Award from Equality Florida. And, you know, one of my proudest prouds, and reflecting my dedication, my concern, my passion for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community. And I hope that I'll have an opportunity to continue to deliver for this community and for all communities. So thank you so very much for the opportunity. It's been wonderful.
Thanks for being a champion. Good night.